All right, Dalton, we ranked our top 10 quarterbacks in college football, top 10 running backs, top 10 wide receivers, but now it's one that everyone's been waiting for, our top 10 tight ends in college football heading into the 2024 season. You know, Dalton, our quarterback, running back, and receiver rankings were really similar in that we had a lot of the same players in the top 10. Our tight end rankings, dude, were all over the place. I mean, you had a guy at like number 8 that I had at number 15. You had a guy at number 9 that I had at number 23. Like, we are all over the place, which is kind of a microcosm of just this tight end class right now that we have in college football, where it's just like, take your pick, man. It's kind of take your flavor, your favorite kind of flavor of tight end, because there are so many guys to choose from, honestly.
Yeah, I agree. And the only thing we really agreed on was the top 2, and beyond that, it was just pure chaos. I think part of it is you've got a lot of guys coming off of injuries. You got to get a lot of guys looking for bounce back years. Had some group of 5 candidates here. There's a ton of guys transferring to what they believe are better situations. There's just so many surrounding factors, and we just don't have, outside of the top 1 or 2, those elite guys. We've definitely seen more stacked tight end classes with top end talent, but there's a lot of guys with a lot of potential here and a lot of really good athletes. The more I was looking at that side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's kind of the theme, is that there are a lot of guys who are great athletes, like you said, and also coming off of injuries. There are a ton of guys that we're getting into who are coming off of injuries right now. I want to put this out there before we start, though. A couple players that you're probably expecting to see on this list that we actually don't have on our list are Aronde Gadsden from, of course, the great Syracuse University, and Bryson Nesbitt from North Carolina. Now, the reason why they're not on this list, even though they're classified as tight ends by their schools and by most people, they're actually wide receivers in our database, because, what was it, like you said, like 11% of their snaps were actually played at tight end. Most of it was at like slot receiver and even outside receiver as well. So they are not counted as tight ends in our system, so we are not counting them in our tight end rankings today. But they would have been probably in the top 10 if we were counting them, because they are very, very good receiving threats for their respective ACC teams. But let's kick it off, Dalton, with our number 10 tight end, which is Amari Niblack, who transfers from Alabama over to Texas. And the best way to describe Amari Niblack is that he is just an absolute freak show of an athlete. So we mentioned before, Dalton, that GAS metric we have, the game athleticism score metric, measures your speed, your quickness, your agility, your change of direction, basically everything out there using GPS tracking data. He tested in the 99.9th percentile for tight ends last year. This guy is as freaky of an athlete as you will find at tight end. His top speed last year was 20.3 miles per hour. So he is an unbelievable athlete. Doesn't really have great size at the tight end position, which is, you could see why he's able to move so fluidly out there at 6'4", 233 pounds, which kind of shows up in the run game. He was one of the 20 lowest graded run blockers last year at the tight end position. But man, he is such a good athlete at tight end. 11 of his 20 catches last year went for 15 plus yards. So I think he's just beginning to unlock his potential, and I cannot wait to see how he does with Quinn Ewers next year at Texas. And we saw how much they used Tavion Sanders at Texas last year. Amari Niblack is going to be a guy, I think he's going to be a major breakout year next year for the Longhorns.
I agree. I think he's going to be the breakout tight end of college football, and I think the way Steve Sarkisian's going to use him is going to help him down there a lot in Austin. But at number 9, I got another transfer, a guy transferring from Oregon State to Michigan State with his coach, Jonathan Smith, and that's Jack Velling. Now from Michigan State, the nation's leader in receiving touchdowns among tight ends with 8 touchdowns last year, a 99.9 deep grade. And what makes Velling so good, and you can see why Jonathan Smith likes him so much, is he finds ways to get open in play action. We know it's a run-heavy system. Velling is the guy that rips defenses up the seam in play action, a 90.5 play action receiving grade, I believe in the top 15 in the country. Really fundamentally sound player, a solid athlete too, with a 91.2 GAS score. Just a guy that Jonathan Smith loves a lot as a fit in his offense. And at Michigan State, I think he's a perfect tight end to have coming, trying to rebuild the team into the Big Ten, trying to make them more physical, solid blocker as well. But you have a guy who's a really legitimate, one of the best play action threats down the field in the country. A lot of times when you saw Oregon State coming off those outside zone looks, it was Velling coming out, wheeling out or wheeling up the seam, finding his way up the seam to make big plays. A lot of Oregon State's biggest plays came with Jack Velling. Again, 8 touchdowns, led the nation. Staying in the same system at a new school, should be in for another big year.
Yeah, I think we've got 2 straight transfers starting off our list at the tight end position. Not one here, though, at number 8, which is Luke Lachey out of Iowa, who a lot of people are big fans of for the 2025 NFL draft, and he's consistently seeing him as one of the top 3 tight ends for next year's draft. He is the next in line, man, for Iowa's tight end dynasty that they have. George Kittle went there, T.J. Hockenson went there, Noah Fant, Sam Laporta, more tight ends as well went to Iowa. Even though he was behind Laporta on the depth chart back in 2022, he was 12th among Power 5 tight ends with a 77.7 PFF grade and was 14th among Power 5 tight ends with 22 catches that went for a first down or a touchdown. He was one of the 20 most valuable tight ends in the country, according to our wins above average metric, even though he was Iowa's backup tight end behind Sam Laporta. Laporta, obviously, 2023, dominated his rookie year for the Lions. Lachey was expected to kind of take that next step and be Iowa's go-to guy at tight end, but like many other guys we'll get into on this list, his season was prematurely ended by an ankle injury in the 3rd game of the season. So still have to see more from him, and he still hasn't really seen him as a true number 1 tight end yet. He will be this year, and hopefully he can stay fully healthy the whole year. But I am a big fan of Luke Lachey, man. He looked so good in 2022 as a backup tight end for Iowa, and then we didn't really get to see him too much this year. 98.5 gas score in 2022, so he's an elite athlete as well. I think Luke Lachey, like I said, is the next in line for tight end for Iowa at tight end, and could be a day 2 pick in the NFL draft, honestly.
Yeah, it would feel wrong if we didn't have an Iowa tight end in this top 10, right? We'd have, even if it wasn't Lachey, we would have to find one. It just feels like they're always stars. But going back to another transfer at number 7 here, we've got Corey Dykes transferring from Maryland to Cal now. And at Maryland had 2 really good years the last 2 years, 7th in the country in receiving yards over the last 2 seasons, 49 catches last year, was 5th in the nation. And he's both productive and reliable, right? 0 drops on 60 targets last year. The only tight end, I should say, with more targets and no drops was Jatavion Sanders from Texas, who wound up being the first pick of the 4th round this year and could have gone much higher. 81.8 receiving grade, was 8th best in the country. Just a good, solid, reliable athlete who can make plays down the field. Doesn't give you a ton after the catch, but his speed and his hands play anywhere. And I think he's going to be a really, really good fit, whether it's Fernando Mendoza or Chandler Rogers throwing down there at Cal. I think Dykes is going to complement the run game with Jay Knott really, really well and be one of the better, if not the best, tight end in the ACC this year.
Yeah, Cal's got a sneaky offense next year, man. Jay not there. Chandler Rogers hopefully could be the starting quarterback for them because we're a big fan of him. You got Corey Dykes as well. I'm a big fan of what the Golden Bears have been doing recently. Another transfer we have here at number 6 now is Benjamin Urasek, who's going from Stanford over to Georgia. He kind of had a disappointing last couple of years for the Cardinal. He had his receiving grade in 2022 was 65.5. In 2021, it was a 79.9. And this past year, he missed the final 6 games of the season with a shoulder injury. So he had a disappointing 2022. 2023, he missed basically half the year with a shoulder injury. So you're asking, okay, well, why is he so high on this list? In 2021, he was a first-team All-Pac-12 member by PFF standards, and was also 4th among Power 5 tight ends that year with 335 yards after the catch. And despite, like I said before, the lackluster last couple of seasons, he has 1,338 receiving yards since 2021. So over the last 3 years, that leads all returning tight ends in college football, even though he missed half the season last year with that shoulder injury. And the only ones above him who had more were Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, and Dalton Kincaid, who are all starting tight ends in the NFL right now, or at least Bowers and Michael Mayer on the same team in the NFL right now. So we'll see. And that was still with like we mentioned this before with Alec Ayematter. Stanford's quarterback situation was terrible. So now he goes from that to Carson Beck, who's the best quarterback in the country. I'm expecting a big bounce back campaign for Benjamin Urasek. Now, there's a chance he might not even be the number 1 tight end for Georgia next year because they got Oscar Delp there, who's a freak show of an athlete. But just based off of what he's done over the last 3 years, Urasek deserves a spot in this top 10. But he and Oscar Delp are forming, by far, I think, the best tight end duo in college football next year. And even though Georgia loses the greatest tight end of all time in college football and Brock Bowers, replacing him with Oscar Delp and Benjamin Urasek is a very, very smart way to go about it for the Bulldogs.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Urasek's ability to run in-breaking routes, to me, the more I watch him, fits in perfectly with what Carson Beck likes to do on offense. I think whether he's 1 or 2 or nominally it's 1A and 1B or whatever, I think Urasek's a great fit in their offense. But let's go from the top of the mountain at Georgia down to the MAC here, and we've got the highest graded tight end in college football last year at Bowling Green. Harold Fannin
Ooh.
Jr., a 90.7 receiving grade and 85.8 overall grade, both led the nation. Right behind Corey Dykes on that list of guys with 0 drops and a lot of targets is Harold Fannin, 57 targets and no drops last season. 5th in the country with 13 missed tackles forced, 406 yards after catch, which was second only behind Brock Bowers. Harold Fannin Jr. at Bowling Green might be the best tight end after the catch in the country right now. I would make that argument. His ability in the screen game, his ability to take short passes and turn them into long plays and make people miss, it's really unmatched. Honestly, you could argue by any playmaker in his conference and by any tight end in the group of 5. He is one of the best tight ends in the country in spite of the school he goes to and not always a great quarterback situation down there. They need to execute as a team better, getting him vertically and getting him to make more plays downfield. But you could see it, especially in the second half of last season. They were starting to get there, things like corner routes and getting him up the seam. He's another freak athlete, man. Don't be fooled by the school and everything like that. 99.3 PFF gas score for his athleticism, which is crazy. This dude can really, really run. I think there's some similarity to Gerald Everett back when he was at South Alabama. He can do a ton of things after the catch, and they really, as a team, just need to execute better. And he may be the best offensive playmaker in the MAC and one of the best in the group of 5 at any position right now. He is a monster after the catch. He doesn't drop anything. He's really reliable, great on design looks when everybody knows he's getting the football on a run heavy team in a run heavy conference. He just adds a dimension to their team, and I think he would add that dimension to a lot of teams if he was anywhere else. But Harold Fannin Jr. to me had to be somewhere pretty high on this list after the season he just had in 2023.
I love it, man. A Bowling Green player, a MAC player in the top 5 of a list is pretty awesome. So I love that. Harold Fannin Jr. checking at number 5. At number 4, we got Caden Prieskorn, who comes from Ole Miss. Now, he missed the first 3 games of the season this past season due to a knee injury, but once he returned, he showed why he was so coveted in the transfer portal the year before, coming from Memphis. From week 4 on, he had 449 receiving yards, which were the 9th most among all tight ends in the country. And over the last 2 years at Ole Miss and Memphis, he has 1,051 receiving yards and 527 yards after the catch. Both those metrics are 4th among FBS tight ends as well. And also, I mean, I hate to point it out because I was there, but in that Peach Bowl against Penn State, man, he was fantastic. He might have been the best player on the field for Ole Miss in that game. He caught 10 of his 11 targets for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns. He had like a couple one-handed catches as well. He was really showing off in that game against Penn State, and I'm a big fan of Caden Prieskorn, even though he did torch my Nittany Lions in that game. But he is absolutely one of the best tight ends in college football, and Jackson Dart has no shortage of playmakers to go to next year. That Ole Miss offense is going to be absolutely electric, and Caden Prieskorn is a big, big reason for that.
Yeah, I totally agree, and that's an offense that likes to throw outside the numbers a lot, but Prieskorn is the guy that could give them balance over the middle. 3 one-handed catches in that game against Penn State, just to remind you. But moving to number 3, that's a guy we saw very recently. Moving to number 3, we've got a guy we haven't seen much recently. In fact, hasn't played since September 24th of 2022, but that's Brant Kuithe out of Utah. Now, last year we kept hearing he's coming back, he's progressing, and then they just never brought him back off of his knee injury. But when he's been on the field, and he's been in college football since 2018, Max, which is incredible that we're heading into 2024, and we've seen him since 2018, but he's always been productive, man. You look at yards per route run. 2019, he was 5th. 2021, he was 8th. 2022, he was 3rd. He's got 2 600-yard seasons to his name. He had 25 missed tackles forced across 2020 and 2021. He's smaller. He's definitely the smallest tight end on this list, but he's a playmaker, man. And I wonder, too, in 2022, if they had him the whole season with obviously an entire season of Dalton Kincaid, how good could their offense have been the entire year with both of them? That's how good Kuithe is. But he's a true move tight end, a playmaker. He's really fast. He's just a guy who moves all over the formation and makes plays for this Utah passing game. And really this year with him and Cam Rising back, those 2 guys should be the centerpiece of it. I would expect him, if he's healthy, to get a lot of volume, make a lot of plays after the catch. Just they were missing that dimension last year badly. They needed, maybe even more so than Cam Rising at quarterback, because they got by with Bryson Barnes and Nate Johnson and those guys, but they didn't have another guy on their roster like Brant Kuithe. But he could come back in the Big 12 this year and get huge volume if he's healthy, put up huge numbers. and maybe statistically by the end of this year be number 1 on this list, if as long as he's healthy. The health is just the big question after we haven't seen him play in almost 2 years, Max.
Yeah, really. I mean, he's played 4 games over the last 2 seasons. I mean, it's kind of crazy how long he's been out, and hopefully he recovers from that torn ACL and torn meniscus that he had a couple years ago. But like you mentioned, man, he was a third-team All-American as a sophomore in 2019 for PFF. So I'm expecting a big bounce back here, and I cannot wait to see Brant Kuithe back on the field. Another guy I can't wait to see back on the field is Mitchell Evans, checks in at number 2 on our list. He was playing, Dalton, like one of the best tight ends in college football. Then he tore his ACL in the 8th game of the season. Before he went down, though, he had 422 receiving yards through 8 games, which were 4th among all tight ends in the country. And the only ones who had more were Dallin Holker, Brock Bowers, and Cade Stover, who are now all off to the NFL right now. So Mitchell Evans was truly one of the best tight ends in college football and was on his way to being a John Mackey Award finalist, in my opinion, before going down with that torn ACL. He had 10 forced missed tackles through those first 8 weeks as well. The only one who had more was Brock Bowers. And we all know how elite Brock Bowers is after the catch. He finished with an 83.7 receiving grade on the season, 7th among all tight ends in the country. He does an amazing job, in my opinion, of finding the soft spots in zone coverage. He had a 97.3 receiving grade against zone coverage, 96th percentile among all tight ends in the country. So as long he has great concentration ability, he had a couple unbelievable catches. One of them against Ohio State, he had a one-hander that was crazy with the guy draped on him. Another one against Duke where the ball was thrown over his head and he tipped it up in the air and caught it while getting another guy was draped on him. I'm a big fan of Mitchell Evans, man. I think he's absolutely one of the best tight ends in the country, and he's 6'5", 251. I'm a big fan of him. I think he's a really, really good security blanket for Riley Leonard this year. And I can't wait to see him recover from that torn ACL, man, and get back to what he was showing before, because he was absolutely one of the best tight ends in the country and was a great replacement for Michael Mayer as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. He's an elite guy, and I think he's the only other guy on this list who would have an argument at number 1. But I think the more I looked at this top spot, I think we're going to do all the positions here, but this might be actually the most obvious top spot ranking out of all these positions, and that's Colston Loveland from Michigan. There is, going back and watching his tape a second time was a lot of fun. There is nobody on this list in the country at this position that moves as fluidly as Colston Loveland, man. His ability to run routes, his hips are so fluid. It's insane. His agility more so than any other player on this list. Like, you've got Mitchell Evans is a big-time seam threat, and we got other guys who have great hands and they're fast. And Loveland does it all, and he has the added dimension of his route running. It reminds you of the elite tight ends in the NFL right now. And watching him, he would have been the second tight end drafted, no question, in this past year's draft. No question. It's just, he is such a fluid athlete, 5th in the nation in yards and yards per route run, caught all 7 deep balls thrown his way for a 99.9 deep grade. The only Power 5 tight end with 20 targets and a top 5 grade against man and zone coverage. There's really no answer for Colston Loveland. It's just Michigan has to figure out everything around him and behind him with the quarterback and in the backfield and everything, but they have an elite tight end. There is zero question to me that Colston Loveland's the best tight end in the country, and I just think you just see him run different routes than the rest of these tight ends on this list. You see the in-breaking routes that some of them run. You see whip routes. You see his hips turn on curls, get up the seam, run deep crossers, and take off on you. There's just nobody in the country at tight end is as versatile and as fluid as Colston Loveland, and I think it might be as obvious a number 1 ranking on any of these lists that we have at any position.
Wow. Interesting. I wonder, actually maybe a fun episode to do is kind of like, okay, let's rank the positions by how obvious the number 1 player is. And I think that's a really good point. I mean, Colston Loveland, to me, was also the pretty obvious tight end 1, 99th percentile athlete in our gas metric as well. 97th percentile open target rate, so he's an unbelievable route runner, like you mentioned before. Yeah, man, he is a freak. And I think out of all these guys on this list, he's the one that I'm betting on to be a first-round pick in next year's draft. I think Colston Loveland is going to be absolutely a freak show, and I think he's going to be by far the top pass catcher for Michigan next year, in my opinion. So I'm excited to see what he can do there. But that's what we got for our top 10 tight ends in college football. Be on the lookout for a few videos breaking down some of these players more in depth. And also, of course, we're doing a lot more of these rankings throughout the offseason right now for every single position. So for Dalton Wassman, for Bruce Eli back there, I'm Max Chadwick. We'll see you guys next time.